Good morning. Welcome to the special City Council meeting. Thank you for coming on a Saturday and giving up your time. It's good to see so many people here in the audience. And thank you to the council also for agreeing to give up your weekend in the summer to this important project. Roll call, please.
Alden Smith. Here. Lee.
Here.
Morsell Hay. Here. Norvell.
Here.
Peters.
Here. So just a point of order, our Community Development Director will give her complete report to the council and to the people of Fort Bragg. And then we're going to try to break it into sections as far as deliberation from the council and input from the community. Our city managers made a nice little agenda for me to look at. And so what that will be is, thank you so much. So direction on zoning for the southern half of the mill site, we're going to break it into portions. The first would be the industrial, how much is needed and where, the urban reserve, open space, Starbucks trees, I guess what they're calling them now, but strange name, but Starbucks isn't on those streets, but we all know what we're talking about. Public facility, coastal dependent, residential and highway dependent. And then we will go into reconciliation of the northern section, which is the urban reserve, wildlife corridor. Then we'll go into the use tables and then proceed with the CLUDC. Thank you so much. Good morning, Marie.
Good morning, Mayor. All right, so I apologize that this presentation is a little bit long, but this topic is very important to the city of Fort Bragg and also very complex. So since 2017...
Excuse me, were we going to have non-agenda items or public comment? I thought that was possible.
No, that's not agenda.
Okay, right.
Since 2017, the Planning Commission, City Council, and the community have participated in 33 meetings to develop a local coastal program amendment for submittal to the Coastal Commission. Staff has worked over the past 20 months to incorporate the City Council and Planning Commission's vision, priorities, and direction into the land use plan, policies, and regulatory language, which together comprise the three components of the local coastal program amendment. For the request of City Council, staff is seeking direction today, regarding the location and quantity of acres that would potentially be rezoned as industrial through the adoption of the land use plan for the mill site, as well as all of the other items that Mayor Lee and Tabitha Miller just mentioned. This staff report provides an overview of the value of land with industrial zoning in Fort Bragg, the value of industrial zoning districts for creating jobs, an overview of the land use tables for industrial land uses on the mill site, and then relevant definitions of each use type from the Coastal Land Use and Development Code. The staff report also explores the current status of the land use plan, including two significant recommended changes based on conversations with the Coastal Commission staff, who have communicated that one, the urban reserve zoning may be problematic, and two, the city must designate an area for low-cost visitor-serving accommodations. Staff and Planning Commission recommendations for proceeding with review of the proposed changes to the Coastal Land Use and Development Code. So I'm going to go over a little bit of history of recent meetings that both the Planning Commission and the City Council have held regarding the land use plan, just so that everybody has the same sort of understanding of where we've been, so that we know a little bit of where we might be going. So on May 21st in 2019, the Planning Commission discussed this item, and they asked many good questions while starting to formulate the land use plan. They looked at a kind of draft plan the staff had prepared. Might just start actually talking you through this with the recommendation that they came to. They preferred the land use plan with more land use zone for multifamily in the northern district, which is illustrated on this map that you see in front of you. They were split on whether the urban reserve area of the north portion of the mill site should be rezoned as open space. So that was this area right in here. You can see my little cursor, probably can't. So I used the red button. So that area was not certain about at that point. They were split on whether the areas right here should be rezoned as urban reserve space. And they all agreed that there was too much light industrial on the southern district. On June 12th, the Planning Commission again discussed this further and had further changes to recommend. On June 15th, the City Council discussed the land use plan in detail as well. And this is their original plan. And at that point, they provided direction to staff that they'd like to see a 150-foot wide wildlife corridor on the east of the coastal trail, so that is this strip of land right here. And then they wanted the areas of the trees located across from Starbucks as open space. And that is this area right here. They were interested in moving the central business district parking lot closer to downtown, which this map illustrates as that little parking area right now, right there. They were comfortable with shifting the Noyo Center to the west, so long as that's where the Noyo Center board wants it to be. They approved the amount of reconfiguration of the housing, and they approved the light industrial reconfiguration in the central business district only. At that meeting, they also directed staff to come back for further discussions about the light industrial zoning at that point that was shown on the map here, east of Oak. The location of industrial zoning on the south part of the map, so essentially all of the industrial zoning on the south part of the map. And just for those of you who haven't been involved in this process for a long time, pink and purple are industrial zoning, and the purple color is the mill site industrial, and the pink is the light industrial. They also wanted further presentation by the Skunk Train regarding their proposal, and they were interested in discussing further with the Skunk Train about the open space promenade, which is right here. The Skunk Train has acquired all the property north of Redwood Street, for those of you who don't know that. So in the staff report, I analyzed City Council's proposed land use plan in kind of reference to the city's land use categories as a whole, so we could understand how it fits within the city as a whole. And in terms of parks, open space, and urban reserve, this proposed rezoning would increase the city's open space 136%, from 209 acres to 495 acres, and would preserve 68% of mill site as parks, open space, and urban reserve, or 285 acres. In terms of industrial zoning, the land dedicated to industrial uses would decline by 70%, from 521 acres to 155 acres, primarily because the entire mill site is now zoned industrial. And it would leave 51 acres of the site, or 12%, as industrial. In terms of commercial zoning, the land dedicated to commercial uses would increase by 9% throughout the entire city, or 38 acres. In terms of residential land use, the residential uses would increase by 4%, or 24 acres, and 6% of the entire site would be residential. So at the most recent City Council meeting, staff did direct us to come back and have a more in-depth conversation about the industrial zoning. So I wanted to share with the community and the City Council some thoughts about industrial zoning. So in general, the city does have a shortage of industrial zoning. I prepared this little document this morning, and there's a copy on your counter if you want to look at it. What I did is I looked at the industrial zoning that in Fort Bragg is vacant right now. And this little image shows the vacant parcels basically north of Pudding Creek. We don't have any vacant industrial land south of Pudding Creek except for the mill site. And then I broke those parcels up, so you have the parcel number, the address. There's 3 heavy industrial parcels and 4 light industrial. In terms of heavy industrial, we have 8 acres in total, but allowable, usable acres is actually only 3.7. And for light industrial, there's 14 acres total, but usable of 9.4. And what makes different portions of these sites unusable, they might have a wetland, part of it might already be developed, so we can't really count it, and some of them have some rare plant communities that I'm aware of. The biggest challenge with these parcels north of town is that they don't have access to sewer and water. So that's what makes them most difficult in terms of redevelopment. We do have a number of businesses that are actively seeking industrial space in Fort Bragg, including North Coast Brewing Company, which wants to expand, the Skunk Train, cannabis manufacturing, industrial arts groups, or woodworkers, and auto repairs. And this is just basically based on people coming to the counter and talking to me about properties that they, or needs that they have that they're not getting met. So industrial zoning results in quality jobs. While the job number and type will depend exactly on the company, in general, I used a very conservative analysis to estimate that the land uses out there that you currently zone would result in about 830 new jobs over about 25 years, or 33 jobs per year. Now, it's not like you're actually going to get 33 jobs per year, it's just because development comes in fits and starts, and it might be a company that comes and brings a lot of jobs one year and then nothing for 2 years. So that's just a general average. In terms of typical businesses that are permitted in industrial zones, they include things like artisan craft product manufacturing, brewery, restaurant, boat and ship construction, laboratory analytical testing, clothing and fabric products, furnitures and fixtures, food and beverage, metal products manufacturing, lumber and wood production, stone and cut stone, printing, schools, live work. So the third point is that industrial zoning is part of the smart growth vision for the mill site reuse plan. It makes the site a mixed-use area. Industrial zoning districts are essential if Fort Bragg wants to remain a working town, which is a major component of the vision for the reuse of the mill site. And that vision is, per City Council and Planning Commission's considered discussion and input to staff, as follows. Over the next 20 years, reuse of the mill site should help support Fort Bragg as a working town with a diversified economy and good jobs, and a healthy, sustainable community with open space and parks. New development on the mill site should enhance Fort Bragg's role as an economic and cultural center of the Mendocino Coast. Industrial zoning also does preserve excellent flexibility for later rezoning by the City Council. And the reason that is because industrial zoning is not a Coastal Act priority use. Any use that's a Coastal Act priority use would be much more difficult to rezone in the future. And those include open space, visitor serving, for example. And as a corollary to that, because the property value of industrial zoning is relatively low, we end up with too much industrial zoning, it would be fairly easy to rezone it to any other category because it would be considered an upzone. So one of the things that happens with land use planning is if someone has property that's zoned a certain thing and you downzone it, you're taking away value from that property. And the courts do sometimes consider that a taking without compensation. The reason we can do this for the mill site as a whole is because the whole site is industrial right now, and so you can do a mix of open space and other uses, and then it would not be considered a taking so long as the total value or averages out. Industrial zoning, I think, also provides predictable and fair land use decisions. I'll get to this a little bit later in my next section, but there was some thought about maybe using it as a permitted use in the urban reserve district. And the problem with that is the Coastal Commission is not too hot on the whole concept of the urban reserve. So that's my next segue into some thoughts about urban reserve zoning. So for those of you who are new to this process, the urban reserve zoning is the light blue color. And the concept behind the urban reserve zoning from the city is that it's very difficult for a small town like Fort Bragg to see into the future sufficiently to rezone this entire site at this time. And so the idea was to sort of bank some land for a future city council and a future community to consider how to rezone that property in the future. And that rezoning would probably consist of a mix of open space, residential, whatever that future city council and community wanted to see out there. And through that conversation with City Council over the past 5 years, another thought that came out of that urban reserve was to have this big idea policy. In other words, to allow the city to approve through a use permit a larger project out there of up to 100,000 square feet or 3 or 4 smaller projects of up to 100,000 square feet on the 70-acre site if it brought good jobs to the community. So the Coastal Commission, after some consideration about this idea, has basically come around to the position that, or at least the staff, that they're not certain how the Coastal Commission itself would react to it because nothing like this has ever been brought forward to them in the past. And there's some concern that it would conflict with a Coastal Act policy that requires that local government's general plan and local coastal element indicate the kinds, locations, and intensity of land uses. And the concern here is that The kinds and intensities are not defined sufficiently in the urban reserve concept. And also there's some concern about too many different types of land uses potentially being allowed in the urban reserve. So their concerns are kind of multifaceted about this. In my conversations with staff, they indicated that not knowing how the commission would choose, if the commission would choose not to go forward with it, they would send an LCP amendment that we submit to them for rezoning the site back to us. And then we would have to essentially resubmit. So it could delay the whole rezoning process by about a year if they decided they didn't like it. And like I said, the staff doesn't know how they would react. So based on that, I recommend that we remove the urban reserve from the zoning map. So how do you address these rather large areas, almost 80 acres of the site, in a way that's sensitive to our community's needs and still provides us with some flexibility in the future? And one possibility would be to rezone the entire site now with final zonings. I have kind of a stand-in for the urban reserve that I talked with Coastal Commission staff about, and they liked it a lot, and that's rezoning all of that to public facilities zoning. So this map shows the urban reserve rezoned to public facilities zoning, or portions of. This is the Planning Commission's preferred alternative. So public facilities zoning also has fairly limited uses that are allowed in it. It's all geared towards public activities. So it's like library, museum, hospital, school, university, those types of uses. Also, if we did that, the big idea policy would need to be abandoned, and we'd have to identify an appropriate floor area ratio or level of intensity for the public facilities zoning district. So with conversations with the Planning Commission, both staff and Planning Commission recommended a combination of the above approach. And similar to industrial zoning, because urban reserve zoning has relatively low value, it also gives the City Council and the future Planning Commission, or now in the future, the option to rezone portions of that land to different uses. So I did list the types of uses that are allowed in that, and those are on page 6 if you wanted to look at them. So at this point, I'd like to go through Planning Commission's recommendations regarding reuse of the site. So they did agree at their last meeting that this area west of the block and a half of future residential development should be rezoned as a parks and recreation. Unfortunately, I didn't get clear direction, mostly because I forgot to ask about it, about this area right here, because that had been rezoned to urban reserve, and we didn't get to talking about whether that should be parks or rezoned public facilities. So I just want to emphasize that that's kind of a question mark, because I didn't actually get that feedback. They liked the idea of having the open space promenade, so they appreciated that idea that was provided by the City Council. They did decide to eliminate the industrial on the backside of Mendo Mill. They decided to consolidate the light industrial in one location adjacent to the Noya Center, with the idea that there might be some opportunities for synergism between the two, maybe with a technical school or that kind of thing. They retained the concept of having highway commercial all the way up to the wetland boundary in this area. They had a conversation that went a little bit back and forth about the residential. And initially, staff had recommended only residential here, and they decided on both locations. The idea that they had was that it would add value to the property and help define the edges of the area that could be zoned for public facilities. They also looked at rezoning this area north of the mill site industrial that had been urban reserve as open space. And go down to the bottom here. And they also looked at zoning this area south of Cypress Street that had been urban reserve as open space as well. The other thing that was sort of interesting that happened in the conversation was this little bit of highway commercial here. This is a separate legal parcel, and in the conversations, there was some concern about just zoning that one little parcel as open space because it could be considered a taking, so they decided to leave it with its current zoning, and its current zoning is actually highway commercial, not timber resources industrial. Let's see if I've got everything right now. Okay, and so the draft land use tables. So when I'm done with my presentation, if you have any questions about this, feel free to talk to me, but I also wanted to go over briefly what the land use tables are and sort of what they signify, because I think it's, they're not obvious unless you're a planning group. So let me try and zoom this in here for a minute. Okay, so when somebody comes into the city of Fort Bragg and they want to do a project in a zoning district, just about the very first thing we do is we look at what's called the land use table to determine if that land use is permitted by right, or if that land use requires a use permit, or if it's simply not allowed within that zoning district. The land use table is the only part of the zoning ordinance that you absolutely cannot get a variance for. So it's kind of written in stone. You can get variances for setbacks and height limits and other types of activities if you have a special situation for your property, but you can never get a variance for a land use table. So it is pretty fundamental. These initials on the top of the land use table that are they're symbols or shortcuts, I guess, acronyms, that's the word I'm looking for the land use code itself. So CN is neighborhood commercial, CO is office commercial, CBD is central business district, CG is general commercial, CH is highway commercial, visitor, and then CD would be coastal dependent. The ones in yellow are the ones that we've added to the table. The Planning Commission went with staff's recommendations in most cases. The points where there's green is what they recommended to change, and I honestly couldn't tell you what it was before they made that recommendation. So when you look at the land use table as a whole for a category like visitors, you kind of want to go down the whole sheet and see, okay, so what's permitted, that's a P. What's not allowed, that's a line through it. What requires a use permit, that's a UP. So the use permit is a process whereby the applicant has to come to the Planning Commission, and the proposal has to be found consistent and compatible with other uses in the neighborhood. That's the main purpose of a use permit. Everything, any development out on the mill site will also require a coastal development permit, and almost all development would also require design review. So we're not talking about those tonight, but those are also required for any future development out there. So taking visitor, for example, if you go down it, you could do crop, you can't do laboratory, you can do craft production, you can do a brewery, you could do a recreational facility, a conference center, health and fitness, library, meeting facility, school. You can see that all those make sense. No emergency shelter, no home occupation, no live work, can't do multifamily, can't do residential care, no single family units. So visitors really oriented towards tourists. Artisan shop is okay, but auto vehicle sales would not be. So that's kind of how you look at the table. Some things that the Planning Commission recommended was that brewery, restaurant be allowed with a use permit. I think I might have just had that permitted by right, I can't remember. And bar tavern be a use permit in both the visitor and the coastal dependent. A nightclub be permitted. Added medical services as a permitted use in CH. Added accessory rental equipment all the way across the board as a permitted use. What we really have is equipment rental, and equipment rental is more like tractors and cars. And so accessory equipment rental would be more like things that are related to being in a hotel. So it might be bicycle or whatever, Segway, that kind of thing. So that kind of gets you a sense of the commercial zoning district. I wasn't intending to go through all of these, but I will just point out some key features that the City Council made in terms of recommendations, and actually they're listed on page 9 of the staff report. So they wanted to add brewery, restaurant, bar, tavern, nightclub as a use permit and visitor serving. at equipment rental to all uses, at urgent care clinic to highway commercial, and vacational rental units as a permitted use in the visitor zoning district. That would be a departure for us, because right now vacation rentals are only allowed in the CBD, Central Business District, sorry. Special district use tables, they wanted to add camping as a permissible use in open space and public facilities. So the Coastal Commission has a new regulation out that, or a new interpretation that requires that 20% of all new visitor serving accommodations be geared towards low-income population. And there's two ways to achieve this on the mill site. One would be to have an overlay zone in the visitor serving districts that basically requires that those areas be kind of reserved for low-income visitors. Another would be to designate a specific location for camping. So I brought this up with staff at the Coastal Commission after the Planning Commission's meeting to find out if it would be adequate to just allow park camping in open space. And Kristen thought that it would not be, that you would actually need to designate a specific area as a camping area. So that might be one thing that you want to think about today, and maybe provide direction to staff about if there's an area on the mill site that you think is appropriate for camping. We could designate that now, or if you would prefer that it be handled as 20% of all units in the zones that are designated as visitor, that they would need to be retained as affordable units. So my last comment today before I sit down is the Coastal Land Use and Development Code is kind of the next step in terms of preparing for the Local Coastal Program Amendment. Remember that the Local Coastal Program Amendment consists of three things. It consists of the Coastal General Plan, which you've already provided direction on all 11 elements. It consists of the Land Use Plan, which you're going to talk about again tonight. And then the last piece is the zoning ordinance of the Coastal Land Use and Development Code. And in my conversations with the Planning Commission, the feeling was that it might make sense for the Planning Commission and staff to kind of work through the whole document, sequentially, because it's 10 chapters, so it's going to take probably 4 months to work through it, and then to present it to you maybe in 2 meetings, rather than having you go through each chapter at the same time. It is a little dull. That's the only reason I'm recommending this. If you want me to bring it forward to you each month, I'm happy to do that, but it is definitely a little bit on the dull side. And then the other thing I wanted to recommend is that perhaps we have a city council meeting in September, on September 21st. And I understand that there are now 3 new property owners out there on the mill site, as well as a lot of community interest in how this process is going forward. There was a planning session in Casper, I think, last month about the mill site. And it seems to me that it might be useful, rather than have staff do a presentation at that meeting, that instead you could give that an opportunity for the community and all these different property owners to come up and do a presentation to you so that you can hear directly from them, and then you can provide direction to staff about how to proceed with their ideas and thoughts. And with that, I'm done.
Thank you. We support that approach, I think, with September's meeting to, if any property owners or potential owners would contact the city hall for a presentation on September 21st. We'll give you some time. We will decide the time depending on how many requests, and then we would give you some time and we would ask questions and provide feedback if you like. Thank you, Marie. Are there any questions on the staff report?
Quite a few.
Okay. Councilmember Marcel.
Okay, so following up on the visitor serving zone, when you talk about designating specific areas versus just saying 20%, would that be 20% of the cumulative acreage that's zoned for visitor serving within a given parcel, or 20% per section of visitor serving? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's a good question. They do it in, they let you do it in a variety of manners. So one way, is that too loud?
No, I was just like guessing whether that made any sense what I was saying. Sorry.
No, I think your question's really good. So one way you can do it is once the project is developed, let's say they do 100 units, 20 units of those have to be dedicated to affordable. So they need to be rented out at what's considered affordable rate by the state of California. I'm not exactly sure what that is, so I hope you don't ask me that. So that's one way you can do it. Another way you can do it is you could designate 20% of the land for affordable types of visitor serving. So that might be like a hostel. Or a third way you can do it is you could designate an area for camping. And if we designate an area for camping, it should probably be 20% of the land area that you have designated already for visitor.
So if we just left it as vague as possible and just said 20% total, that would give flexibility as far as location. It wouldn't tie their hands to where they.
I'm not sure that will work because that was my thought with having the camping, just allowing camping in open space, and Kristen felt that that was not sufficient. She wants to see it on the map and designated. So this is the visitor serving zoning right here, the kind of dark pink colored where my little mouse is rolling around. I can zoom in. So there's one parcel north of Redwood and then there's one parcel south of Redwood. So one of the things you could do is you could take 20% of each of these parcels and make it for low-cost visitor serving. The other option you can do is just require as a policy that when there's visitor serving units developed here, 20% of them have to be affordable. The one thing that I'm concerned about with that is just the administrative burden of tracking it for staff. I think a much easier solution, and actually ultimately probably preferred maybe even by the landowners, would be to find some area, somewhere in what was the urban reserve, or you guys haven't decided what it's going to be now, but somewhere out here where you think it might be a good camping location. I think camping is preferable away from the wind if you're going to select a location, and preferable a little bit close to downtown. So just from a planner's perspective, I think somewhere in this area makes sense because it's walkable to downtown, and it's it doesn't have to be a huge area either. An acre would probably be sufficient.
Larry, just one question. I heard you mention that the planning commission talked about a 150-foot wide wildlife corridor. I mean, it seems like it shrunk on their map.
Yeah, so it was, that was actually the city council that talked about the 150-foot wide wildlife corridor. Let me turn on the planning commission's map. So the planning commission decided to go, they had left both of these areas urban reserve. So they had decided to go with the northern portion as open space, and then I apologize, I forgot to get direction on this parcel by Pine about whether they wanted that to be public facilities or open space, so I don't know the answer there.
So did they actually use the wildlife corridor for what we decided on?
So that's a good question. I wouldn't say it actually worked that way. What they did is they were finishing up their old map because at their meeting they only had 4 people. So there were a number of items that they didn't have a quorum on that were, remember how I highlighted them with yellow because there wasn't a full vote. And so they started out by voting and finishing up that. And then they worked from that map, mostly focused on the south side. Their idea around a wildlife corridor was that it not be designated with zoning. They had recommended a policy that would require that all development be set back. I believe it's either 100 feet from the coastal trail itself or 200 feet from the bluff edge, whichever was greater. So it's essentially the same thing as a wildlife corridor, it's just not zoning it on a map.
So if I heard you correctly, through our community meeting process, we figured the community wanted about 30% of the mill site developed, and under the plan that we see here, it's somewhere around 22% with some of that still left open to develop. So that looks good in terms of the development out there. That has been scaled down significantly since we started this process. I have some questions about camping. Most Campgrounds are run either by the state, sometimes by the county, sometimes privately. I don't know if you're suggesting the city get involved in running a campground, but anyway, so there'll be some discussion there, I'm sure. I understand the 20%. I think that is wise to take that into consideration because of the environmental justice policy that the Coastal Commission has just passed a couple of months ago. They haven't really developed it yet, but they're going to keep that into consideration. So if you have visitors serving facilities, they can't just be big fancy hotels. You have to remember that environmental justice includes things for visitor services that will be more amenable for someone who is in the low income bracket. So that's good that you pointed that out. We're going to have to consider that as we move forward. My question is the urban reserve that we set aside, the type of facilities that I envision out there are the very ones that you mentioned under public facilities. So that's good to hear. But I have a question. If we wanted to have a solar farm and a power plant developed out there that we would run municipally, would that fall under public facilities? Is that something we could look at in the future? In other words, a sustainable solar-powered power plant so that we're not dependent on PG&E or anybody else, that we have our own source of power here. Would that be something we could do under public facilities? Because I didn't have time to look on the chart and see if that's something we could do.
Yes, it is.
Okay, those are the questions I have.
Thank you. Any other questions? Marie, on the Planning Commission's recommendations for the medium density housing along the highway commercial, can you tell us what their recollection of their thoughts of why that should be medium density along there and along the other side of the public facilities recommendation, as opposed to industrial?
Sure, I can. So I think it comes from a couple of things. One is just a general concern about the cost of housing in our community and specifically the need for workforce housing. The reason they focused on medium density is because it's fairly low density. It's essentially 15 units per acre. So it wouldn't look that different from any part of Fort Bragg that's west of Harold Street or east of Harold Street. In terms of putting it next to this road here, the thought was that you already have, an existing road, so it makes it a little bit easier to put there. And it's not too far from Highway 1 where you have sewer and water in the street. So just in terms of developability, I think this was viewed as something that could be done sooner. The piece out by Jerry Mello Way, the thinking was that most people who are visiting the Noyo Headlands Park are usually walking out here and wouldn't see the homes. I think they saw it as an opportunity to improve the value of the property and the ultimate ability to put infrastructure in. There was a lot of conversation and so we went back and forth about where both one or the other.
Okay. Thank you.
When we talk about permitting universities and different zoning, is it assumed that dormitories are included in the university campus, or does that necessitate separate zoning?
So that's a really good question, and that's actually one of the things that came up in the conversation was housing for the new people who might be working on the mill site would be important, and making this more of a mixed-use kind of area. That is entirely up to you. So you could certainly allow dormitory housing if you're going to allow university in the public facilities, and I would recommend it. So yes.
Now, I know, okay, so when I spoke with you about, why housing isn't typically permitted in industrial zones, it made a lot of sense as far as driving up the price so it's prohibitive, and then also conflicts between zoning, basically that housing tends to be less permissible as far as things can be accompanying it. What about a dormitory style workforce housing being permissible? Do you feel like that would have the same repercussions?
So dormitory style housing is a very particular housing type, yeah. And I think for a university situation, it makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure many employees would want to live in today's world in dormitory housing, I don't know. But maybe, yeah.
If I could just tag on to what she's saying, I think is, it was presented to us, I think, 5 years ago from the Noyo Center, their vision. Remember Sheila? And she had a slideshow and pictures, and remember residential people that didn't look like a dorm, but it was these sort of bungalows set up aside the research center. You know, they have this vision of exactly what you're talking about. So that was presented to us, and I don't think she's talking about a 4-story dorm like, you know, large campuses that UCs have, but more of a living situation within sort of the tech community, kind of a future, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, so I totally hear you, and you can, of course, put workforce housing in various zoning districts. My only concern is if that just becomes a proxy for doing housing in those zoning districts and then displaces the types of businesses you're actually trying to encourage into those districts. With the Noyo Center site, the conversation was always just 20 units, and 20 units of housing on an 11-acre parcel is not very much, so you're certainly going to have enough left over for all the public facilities and the research and the different pilot projects and stuff that they want to do. So there's just a concern there from me, just from a land use perspective, that if you allow, and a little bit you might be getting back to the urban reserve issue that the Coastal Commission had, which is allowing too many uses within a zoning district such that it's not a separate zoning district anymore. So rather than answering that question, could I note it and talk with Kristen, because I want to make sure I give you good information.
And I guess my follow-up question to that would be, is there language for the coastal dependent zoning that enables those 20 units already, or is that something you still need to look at?
There is language in there, and there is, it is allowed within the use table, and I believe there's a note on the use table that limits the number. I can't totally remember off the top of my head. And if not, that would be the way you do it. So I have residential use as part of a mixed use project. And then what you basically just do is do a note and say it can be as much as 20 units.
So with the use permit, we could potentially add that same residential component mixed use project for Millside Industrial, if that's a road we want to go down, that might be a way to do it.
It's possible, but again, I feel a little bit that you might be running into issues with conflicting uses within a zoning district. So one of the issues there is, let's say this parcel here is actually owned by, this purple parcel here. Sorry. Let's just say, for sake of argument, that this parcel here is owned by three or four different property owners. And this property owner decides that they're going to have 30 units of housing and a little, I don't know, tech company. And the person who bought this parcel wants to put in a small, high-end lumber mill. And now you have created conflicts between these two uses, where those residents are going to come to the hearing and speak out against something that would otherwise be a pretty easy thing to approve in an industrial zone. So that's one of the challenges you get when you allow uses that are potentially places where people have a lot of conflict with each other right next to each other.
Like airports
and residential uses. Exactly. So I just don't advise it. Of course, I can ask Kristen and see what her position is and let you know.
All right. Any other questions of the council? We're going to open for general comments. comments and, from the public. I do have some speaker cards. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to break it into chunks as far as this report that Marie has prepared for us. So we do have some speaker cards, and remember, the first person is Leslie Ashiwada. Please come on.
Mayor, just Ralph, Leslie's coming up. We wanted to mention that we got a number of public comments from folks via email between last night and this morning. And those will be uploaded as part of the record, but that hasn't happened yet just because of the timing of this meeting in the morning. So we're aware of it. I believe we got 6 or 7. And if you didn't send it to include the city clerk on it, it would be great if you make sure you do that if you want to be part of the record.
And we can forward to, we did get quite a few overnight. It started at 5 a.m. meeting, so there's a lot of interest. Hello. And remember, we have a 3-minute time limit, please.
So I just handed to June a 2.5-page comment. Obviously, I can't speak to all of that. And actually, my comments really need to be couched around a larger conversation. A letter was sent from the Fort Bragg Headlands Consortium that sort of sets the context for what I'm going to say. I'm talking about details, and I'm not speaking as a member of the Fort Bragg Headlands Consortium, although I am one. I'm speaking as an individual citizen. So what I gave to June includes comments about the wildlife corridor and my concerns about overlays and setbacks. So I really tried to bring to bear exactly what my concerns were in terms of where fences get put and who manages the property and what that means for a wildlife corridor and how Bluff Retreat is going to be managed. So, you know, I'm learning a lot about zoning. I'm really appreciating the work that you do and the Planning Commission and a couple of members here and what Marie has been presenting, because it's been a real education for me. Because it's a political process by nature, and of course my concern is what's going on out on the headlands ecologically. And what's going on out there ecologically does not have any concept of zoning and land use and setbacks and overlays. So I'm really asking you to consider the policies that you put in place, what impact they'll have on the ground, because the map is not the territory, as Gregory Bateson said. So I speak about the wildlife corridor. I speak about the parking area off of Alder, because I think that's extremely problematical for any potential to daylight Alder Creek. The central business district as well is placed right over where Alder Creek is broken out of its culvert. It's always wet and swampy there. And so you need to think about what kind of infrastructure is needed to reroute the creek and still allow for daylighting, which I think is critical for stormwater management and for the health of the ecosystem. I'm advocating against the industrial zoning that's placed there, because the vision of restoration there really needs to include the wetlands area and everything that it encloses. And when you put something that is surrounded by wetlands and put roads across, then by nature you have to create culverts and stormwater management in ways that confine the ability of that wetlands habitat to function appropriately. So I know it's a concrete pad out there, but there's nothing that can't be restored. And what the agencies that we've spoken to that do restoration are not interested in open space that's sort of here and there. They want to see a large cumulative area.
Thank you, Leslie. We have to.
I have lots more
The
to say.
Vice Mayor does have a question for you.
Thank you. Which industrial?
I'm talking about the mill site industrial that's between Pond 8 and Pond 3, you know, so you've got, it's been referred to in the past as the donut hole, and right now you've got roads going across there, you've got an industrial area. I'm not saying that the city doesn't need industrial, it does, and I don't know where on the mill site it most appropriately fits, or if there's places north of town that might be better. Yes, at a cost to bring infrastructure up there. But when you put those roads through from Madrone and from Maple, and you plop industrial there, and I know it's PAD, but it's restorable. We've been talking to agencies that say that's not an obstacle. So if you're going to be visionary, what they've said in terms of acquisition, if they were to look at it, to acquire it and bring their power to bear for grant writing, to bring in funds, to bring in really good jobs, restoration jobs, that would be long-lived, not just while the restoration is happening, but for management.
Okay, thank you.
So that's what they're talking
I
about.
think you did answer this question.
Okay.
Thank you. I do have a card from Amy Nguyen. Please come in.
Hi, thank you. Amy Wayne, Coastal Planning and Biology. I appreciate greatly the process in general. I am extremely supportive of the concept of having kind of this mapping presentation day workshop in September. I think that's essential. I have been somewhat frustrated with some of the process in that there's some ability for the public and the property owners to comment about what's happening, but then comments closed, a lot happens after the comments are over, and then there's no sort of immediate ability to give feedback on what's happening to the properties that are out there. So heartily encourage September 21st kind of mapping day. I think that, we've got a bunch of thoughts. Urban Reserve, I think, is a very helpful tool. I would encourage more in-depth conversation with the Coastal Commission staff about whether Urban Reserve truly is too vague, or whether it just needs a little bit more specificity about specific goals. I heartily agree with Marie's characterization of industrial as being a good base zoning that allows for upzoning later. Down zoning from something like open space or perhaps public facilities to something else could be extremely difficult, or specifically from open space to something else would be extremely difficult because that's a priority use. I want to remind everybody that commercial highway allows for residential as mixed use, which has some residential in there. For workforce housing, I'm super intrigued by the concept of dormitory style. When leaving my parents' house and for I don't know, 15, 20 years, I lived in quite a wide variety of housing types. Very little of it was kind of conventional. So when I finally had my own house with indoor plumbing and a roof that doesn't leak, that was very exciting. So I've lived in an SRO type housing as a young adult, following schooling, and that helped me get my feet on the ground. I think that, and I've lived in live-work type spaces that are in the middle of industrial zones that we all know we're in the middle of industrial zones. And it's just, you're acclimated to that. So I'm very intrigued by that thought. As you know, I'm very passionate about retaining industrial in larger areas because we've known that we've had industrial north of Crane, but people have come to me asking to be able to develop stuff, but have opted out because those are too small, already limited by natural resources or limited by infrastructure. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. It was good timing, right on the second there. Your practice.
You're training me.
We appreciate everybody maintaining the 3-minute because we have so much interest. David Jensen on that card.
Thank you for the opportunity to come before you again. Last time we met on a Saturday morning, I stressed the point to plan your open space as carefully as you plan your central business district and your industrial areas and your residential areas. There's a thing that happens, the masking of realities by the use of averaging and metrics. Metrics are important, but metrics can hide as much as they expose. We've seen it in the mill pond, where GP and their consultants have hidden the existence, excuse me, it's a pejorative term, but they've masked the existence of contamination hotspots through the use of averaging over the entire area of the mill pond. I fear that we're facing the same danger with the issue of open space. Open space is, in order for open space really to be effective, it needs to be viewed in terms of functionality. You can take a stack of lumber and you want to build a house. And so you throw this lumber out, on the ground. And throwing out more lumber on the ground does not necessarily make a better house. It's the same with open space. We can throw more net acreage of open space, but we have to look at the functionality that open space needs to perform. So as we go through this process, please consider why open space. Obviously, there are multiple purposes. There'll be some ballparks for the children. There'll be some meeting spaces. There'll be some trails for people to access the coast. But don't let the averaging, the accumulation of all those multiple uses mask whether or not the functionality of all those is effective. I'm thinking about the wildlife corridors, I'm thinking about the wetlands, and a lot of what Leslie's already spoken to. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. David Curdy.
Dave Curry. Just one quick thing, kind of ties on to what he just said. Is that, to me, that the central business district, that red square, seems to be way too small. And I think it should be twice as big to the north. And it ties in respect that, developing the central business district has reverberation effects with the open space. In other words, by developing a concentrated area downtown, you relieve the pressure on the areas of open space that would need to be developed. So that's the one thing that I wanted to say, is that I think the central business district should be zoned much bigger and to encourage development of the downtown area, which is also a draw for the tourists, as well as retail and office businesses in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Winslow. Al Winslow.
Excuse me, Cal Winslow for Bragg. You can hear that. Yesterday, we, several of us from the Headland Symposium Committee, presented the city with a petition asking that the headlands be thoroughly cleaned up first. That's the key element that has to be part of this process. And the petition, which we circulated, received in a couple of weeks more than 4,000 signatures. Now, most of them were from this area and the coast, but in fact, they came from all over the country, and some of them from all over the world. And the thing that I'd like to say about them is that, and in the many pages of comments that came in with them that are attached, that every single comment talked about the beauty, the natural beauty of this area. And that was the thing that was, it seems to me, very first on the list of thinking of people. The fact that they came from around the world, it seems to me, also tells us that people know about this area, but what they know about it is that they think that it's a very beautiful area. And so it seems to me that along with the idea of cleaning up the mess that still exists there, we ought to be concerned about that kind of thinking, the thinking of what is really important about this area. So I would like to present these again, just so that everybody has a chance to see them. You'll see that there are quite a few of these, and if anyone wants to look online, I can help facilitate that. Can I give it to someone?
Is it a short read of what the petition says that people signed that we can hear?
Can I have time on this, though?
Well, I'm just wondering if it's short, you could probably have time. I'm sorry.
I'm curious of time, thanks.
If it's not short, if you can summarize it.
Closer to the microphone,
Yeah, go ahead, please.
It's short. You're taking a lot of my time, so dear City Council members, here are more than 4,000 signatures supporting our petition to save 400
What does
acres.
the petition say?
that's the question.
He's reading, he's there.
Never mind.
I'm not trying to be rude.
Well, I thought this would be important for you to hear. Save 400 acres of Fort Bragg headlands, clean up first for a healthy Mendocino coast. That's fair enough, right? The overwhelming response to this petition emphasizes our committee's desire for a full and thorough cleanup of the former Georgia-Pacific mill site. This is backed up by the Fort Bragg City Council's resolution to this effect passed in 2017. This petition addresses issues of increasing community concern due to the fact that 2 parcels of the former mill site have already been sold, even though the cleanup is not complete. That gives you the gist of it. You want more?
So if I may add, my confusion too, I mean, I was there to receive it yesterday and I was looking, trying to understand what the actual petition said when people signed it, because that's really important information for us. So I did just pull it up here on the change.org website.
Yeah.
And it's helping me understand this more specific, because I've read your letter and I totally understand what you're saying, but there's a little bit of a gap in terms of, well, what did people see when they signed it, right? So I
They
think,
saw this.
that's not what I'm seeing on
Well, it's almost
the
the same.
change.org.
It's almost just
So,
anyway, you can do that. I don't have that copy. I don't have my computer here in front of me.
I mean, am I accurate? I mean, that's, my take is just that.
All I wanted to
wanting
know
what
is
people
if
saw.
somebody in Europe, so what did they see that made them sign it? They didn't see a letter to the city council that you just read me. I wanted to know what the petition said that they signed. It was a simple question. It wasn't meant to be rude. It wasn't meant to be dismissive. I'm sorry if it came off that way. I was trying to help you present your case.
Well, thanks.
That's all.
Thanks.
Okay? I guess I'll see it when I get this letter that you're going to give all of us what the petition actually says, and that'll suffice. I just thought maybe some people here might want to hear what it said too. That was a simple question. I just maybe didn't phrase it properly. Thank you.
Okay, that will be coming.
the petition say?
Well, I read
I think
you
it is read it.
the way the petition works, and I don't have it. I've got the letter here. I don't have it. Just as a
May I-
apparently.
May I go ahead and read what it says on
Thank
change.org
you.
so we can understand what people read when they signed it? Okay, so,
Read the undersigned.
the header is, say, 400 acres of Fort Bragg headlands, clean up first for a healthy Mendocino coast. That's the header. Clean up first. Final plans for the Fort Bragg headlands mill site remain stalled, and we fear that the city will allow GP to sell off whichever parcels it can and then walk away from the toxic remainder. We insist that the mill site be cleaned up before parcels are sold and developed. Further, we call for an overall plan that includes natural restoration, daylighting of Maple and Alder Creeks, and protection for both the headlands and the ocean, as well as public open space protected for generations to come. The well-being of the northern Mendocino coast is entirely dependent upon a healthy ocean and natural landscape, which requires protection for our coastal resources. The former GP mill site, now owned by Koch Industries, encompasses almost 1/3 of the city of Fort Bragg. Its reuse offers an opportunity to showcase the importance of thoroughly cleaning up our coastal resources that have been polluted by highly toxic materials extremely harmful to the health and well-being of humans and wildlife both on land and in the ocean. This is particularly urgent because the mill pond has been identified as the most polluted area of the site and its failing dam leaves it highly vulnerable to earthquakes, tsunami, and sea level rise. Please sign our petition and send it along to others.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Our next comment card is from Mr. Mike Hart.
Can I finish my 3 minutes?
I've given you extra time, so
This wasn't me.
I've given you more than 5 minutes on that, so we're going to call the next by allowing you to read the letter.
You're joking.
No, I'm not.
I
I'm
was
going to allow
interrupted
somebody
about
else.
1 minute into my presentation. I have other things I'd like to say.
Okay, wrap up, please, briefly, what you want to finish.
Well, speaking just for myself and not the committee, and this is changing the subject a bit, I would like to say something on a personal level, because I understand.
No. I was going to let you wrap up the signatories, and so there's going to be no more time for you, sir, if you're going to give your personal comment. We've given you time. We allowed you 5 minutes to read the letter and the signatories, and she's clarified by reading what's on the website, and it will come to us, and it'll be a part of the public record.
Well, I object to this.
Thank you.
Everyone else gets 3 minutes.
You've had 5 minutes, sir.
No, I didn't.
I'm going to ask you to
Other
please.
people who are speaking.
Okay, Mr. Mike Hart, you're next.
It's very interesting.
I'd actually like to yield to my time. I'd like to.
I have 4,000 signatures.
Excuse me,
Listen
please.
to the man.
We have listened to the man.
No,
But if he's giving you your time, then you can have 3 minutes.
Kind of why people are not comfortable with meetings in this setting. So I just wanted to say, as a person who's a parent here and who would like there to be good work for children, for people growing up here, and I have children who've grown up here and would like to stay if there were good jobs, and that's been much of the discussion about this. I would like to just add this comment. There are jobs in between service and industry. Those aren't the only two categories. And as someone who spent a good time in my youth working in factories, I'd like to say that I think very few people who worked in factories would be advising their children that a good job is in a factory. Now, when you talk about light industry, I'd like to know what's really meant by that. Electronics, do you know anything about that? Working in electronics or garment, do you know anything working in garment? The new workforce, do you know anything about what it's like to work at Amazon, for instance, which gets a lot of discussion these days? There are alternatives to that. When I went into a factory as a youngster, at least the wages were high, and that's because we had a union, and I was a member of the International Association of Machinists for many years. There aren't any unions today to speak of. So that when a person goes in to work for Volkswagen, for example, in Chattanooga, Tennessee, you may have seen this, do you know what they start out working for in heavy industry? In a big company like Volkswagen, they started out at $13 an hour. So if we're going to have a talk about good jobs, we really ought to know what good jobs and what aren't good jobs. I really can't thank you for all those interruptions.
And I ask that the public refrain from outbursts while we're trying to hold this meeting. So those are the last of the speaker cards that I have.
If I could just, one of the things I've talked about for many years is a desalinization plant. That's sort of futuristic. It was at the time, and maybe is today. Those are good jobs we'd be talking about there. You heard me talk about a solar farm and a power plant. Those are good jobs. Those are jobs talking, about the future. I worked in a cannery. I was a teamster. I know what it was like. So sometimes when you're trying to get your point across to the city council, if you're talking down to them a little bit or feeling as though they're not going to be listening, understand that they are listening. And perhaps maybe they're trying to help you in what you're trying to say, and don't immediately think that they're attacking them in some way. And some of us are empathetic too. I've been there. I'm 66 years old. I picked tomatoes when I was 10 years old with Braceros. So I know what a bad job is. But I want to look at the future. And we don't know what the future is. The future, I don't think, we're not going to be building cars out there. That's not in my head. I don't think it was any of your heads. We're not going to be canning tomatoes out there. You know, we're not talking about those kind of jobs. I think we're talking about jobs that we want to create here that are going to sustain this community, that are going to help us, okay? Not some corporation somewhere. That's not what we're envisioning. So don't accuse us of that and put words or thoughts in our heads that aren't there. Thank you.
Yeah, Rex Schresser. Yeah, this has been going on for 20 years. You know, we've been looking at this thing for a long, long time. Since I've only got 3 minutes and I don't expect any overtime on this from Will, I'd just like to point out a couple of simple things. When you guys got into this whole deal, the plan was for 70% of the mill site to be developed. And the light industrial and the multifamily housing and the complexity of all of the different uses struck a lot of people as outrageous. And now you have a petition with 4,000 people that are saying basically, Lindy, however it was phrased, what they're saying is, this is an incredible property, and we value it. And this business of slicing it up and dicing it up and putting in all these different multi-uses shows an enormous lack of vision. A lack of vision. This is a unique, world-class property, and if it's preserved as a world-class property, it will have a much greater value to the people of the city and to people who might come here than if we do this random, haphazard development. And I'd like to point out also that when you got into this thing and you planned all this potpourri, shall we say, I hate that word, but this big complex development with all these different uses, you were going to develop 70% of the land in these various uses. Marie took it to the Coastal Commission, and the Coastal Commission reversed those numbers and said, oh no, you're going to leave 70% of it open, and you can only develop 30% of it. So the Coastal Commission flipped the numbers. But the City Council and the Planning Commission never reacted. Isn't it relevant that if you have a lesser amount of space and the same number of uses, that it's even worse? This petition, and I really think that it was a very useful thing, got 4,000 signatures. That's a lot of signatures. And something is going to happen that's going to preempt, whether it's a ballot initiative or whether it's a change of personnel in the City Council in an election. The people of the city are not so dumb that they're going to allow 55, houses right up next to the No-Yo Center. That's outrageous. And all of this comes out of a planning process that's been designed to do nothing. Now, I've only got 37 seconds, so let me say this quickly. That when they reversed the numbers, from 70% developed open space, from 30% open space to 70% open space, nobody addressed all of the rocks and asphalt and cleanup and all the things that would be there. Your plan allows 70% of that space to remain a wasteland, and there is no plan to do anything about it, and I've been told by members of the City Council that doesn't matter because Georgia Pacific owns it. Well, Georgia Pacific isn't going to do anything about it. This planning process run by Marie Jones...
Your time is up, sir.
You know, you better get a gavel.
Excuse me.
This is a public meeting. You're bullshit.
2 minutes are up.
You know what?
Do not yell at me, sir.
I'll yell at you. I'll get a damn placard.
We're going to adjourn for 10 minutes.
Jesus.
So what we're going to do now is, as I mentioned at the opening of the meeting, that we will try to break this into sections as far as public comment and then deliberation and recommendations from the council. So the first section would be industrial on the southern portion of the mill site. Industrial, how much is needed and where, and then we'll go into, then you can also speak about urban reserve in that section. How much and where. Should this be revised and how? And then open space, how much and where. So public comment on any of those: industrial, urban reserve, open space. Please.
Thank you for letting me Terry Bowman with Mendocino TV. Last year I did an interview at the Abalone Cook-Off with the guy who supplied the farm abalone from Ocean Rose Abalone Farm in Cayucos. We talked about the viability of doing it up here in our headlands, and he said there's absolutely no reason. It's a self-contained system. Incidentally, they also got bought out by a development, so they're not going to be anymore. So the Ocean Rose is going out of business this year. So I think maybe we might want to look about talking about someone, because he has a market that's about to die, that is a viable market right now internationally. Maybe we want to talk about restoring an abalone farm up in that area, or at least putting something aside for oceanography or something of that nature. Next to that, there was also, used to be a plan in 1995 to do a breakwater out there in the harbor. I think we might want to look about that in some new green infrastructure so that we can talk about help tying that in and generate enough electricity to run a desalinization farm or a desalinization plant. We're going to need another source of water. So I'm just, throwing these up that these are 5, 10, 15 years in the future, but maybe we can look forward to tying this out into a breakwater and encouraging industrial use down there that will also be green and help us move forward in hardening for the upcoming climate change. Thank you.
Hi, Bruce Broderick, Fort Bragg resident. I live here on the northwest side. I've been there about a year now, and I'm really appreciative that it's for as busy as the rest of town is. It's a nice, quiet neighborhood. And I listen to things like the eternal whine of the brewery, which is fine, it gets used to, and the diesel engine whistle and all of that, the tourists that come along with it, and they're helpful to the community. But as we move forward in the 21st century, one of the things I question, and it's a small thing, is one single diesel freight engine emits the same pollution as 1,087 cars. And the town is looking at expanding that. So at this point in time, right now, if you look at a diesel freight engine, it's putting out probably about as much as it did when the mill was running, based on how many trips it makes every day. If we extend that out into a very sensitive zone, we can probably be looking at double what it's doing now. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't happen. I'm just saying that maybe we want to look at something a little bit more environmentally friendly than a mid-90s or 80s freight train to be one of the flagships of Fort Bragg. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm Jacob Patterson. So this is just about the southern portion, industrial,
yes,
open space, urban reserve. Okay.
Yes.
One of the topics was combining some of the maps still have different types of zoning down there. I much prefer the option of having just the mill site industrial / employment as one zoning district and not doing the separate light industrial down there. I would include the accessory residential uses in it. I think our use table already does that for our other industrial zones, so the Coastal Commission approved those. I don't see why they have a problem with this before. The locations, I submitted a map already, so you can see where my suggestions are. It could be adjusted a little bit. I would probably, I didn't put this on my map, but expand the public facilities to the north of our current wastewater treatment plant in that little area, as long as it's not deed restricted. I don't think it is, because it's still owned by GP, and maybe a little bit to the east. I think the open space, you have to remember it's a zoning district, and just because we're calling it open space doesn't mean it stays like open and empty and natural. There's the use table, you have them, they've got all kinds of things in there. Horticultural, farming, there's indoor recreation meeting centers, which I would interpret to include like a conference facility. So there's still a lot you can do there. And I also believe that we should be able to do parking in open space. But you might want to add that to the use table, and I'll say that again later when we have use table comments. But I think the open space is important. I would leave it where you guys left it before, on the forested area down there. And as you can see on my map, I would extend it for most of what used to be urban reserve, including down in the further southern part. If you wanted more development up there, I would cluster it kind of where the old light industrial was. I also like making Ocean Dependent larger and on both sides of the little road. But those are my comments about that.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chris Hart with the SkyTrain. I have a number of comments to make today, but I'm going to confine these three to open space issues. Now, all three of the open space issues are related to the north side of the property, but I'm bringing them up here because they were developments that came out of the previous Planning Commission meeting on July 10th, and that was the southern focus. But there were three notable things that impacted us. First off, on the northwest corner, one of the issues that happened here was that there was a planning commissioner who wasn't at the June meeting when some of these items were discussed. When they came to the July meeting, they then were asked to voice their opinion on some matters. The thing that concerns me with the process of these three issues is that they weren't there for public comments in June. At July, when this was brought up, it was later in the meeting, and I wasn't able to get up and speak about the three issues. So I felt like we never had a chance to comment and influence his vote, and it was a deciding swing vote. So it was a 3-2 vote that then resulted in the map you see there. So I'm concerned about the process, and I know this is a very complicated thing you're trying to move forward, but it was frustrating to not be able to comment. The three items, one is about the open space on the northwest corner. We've been making a lot of progress, and I certainly look forward to the September 21st meeting to talk to you about that. If you want, I'll talk about it today, but we have a lot of ideas about what would happen up there. And so I oppose what was put out there because we've been sitting here waiting for that chance to share our vision, and there's already maps being changed. So that's my concern there. Second is the open space just north of Redwood, where the promenade was talked about. Up for the last year, we've had commercial there. And this was something from our day one, that's what we planned. And all of a sudden now, all of our commercial's gone. We have a year of developing our business models based on that commercial. And without the opportunity to even speak at the last July 10th meeting, all of our commercial just disappeared. As you can imagine, that really impacts our financial plans. The third issue is a smaller issue, but it's the public facilities. That's something that's brand new. It may work for us, but that just came up, and that's the blue spot there in the middle of the map. That's something that all of a sudden it has been added to the map, and we may ultimately support that, but again, we want to engage in it, and we have so far not had that chance. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we would invite you, or your comments, and if you could submit your request before the September 21st meeting, I think that would be helpful. But we would give you more time at that meeting to present. This is certainly not anything final.
Sure.
So then we want to hear from you and hear your plans for that area. We don't want to change the map on you overnight, and that's not our intention. So then please submit your request to the city manager, and we'll make sure we address it at the September 21.
We certainly do.
Just to be clear, right here is what you're talking about?
Yeah, the immediately north of Redwood Avenue.
But I thought, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that green strip is the promenade, is that? Okay.
Hello, my name is Ron Munson, and first I want to thank the City Council and Marie for wading through this immensely complicated issue and giving it thoughtful consideration. What I have to say isn't on any specific zoning decision, but it has more to do with an overarching sense of what the value of the entire property is to the people of the planet, really. We moved here 30 years ago into the Pudding Creek area and raised our family here because it's really a spectacular coastal marine setting. 4,000 people signed those signatures because they appreciate the spectacular coastal marine setting here. And I have to say, it chills me when I see reports in the paper that people are interested in developing dollar stores or auto zones or box stores on a magnificent coastal vista. So I think what I would urge you all to consider the repercussions of whatever zone or development takes place on the Millsite property, that it be tasteful. And I don't know how you define that. You know, you can say one franchise maybe isn't very tasteful and yet another may be. But the aesthetic component, I think, is extremely important, as well as preserving natural systems, things like daylighting the creeks and thinking ahead to sustainability. Anyway, that's really what I want to urge you strongly to consider, and thank you for this opportunity.
Good morning, Mike Hart with SkyTrain. Very briefly, Councilman Peters, if you ever do want to have a conversation about power and desalinization, we have a company that does exactly that. We're happy to have that conversation anytime. From a policy perspective, the discussion about using policy as opposed to moving the zoning blocks around about setbacks from the headlands, I think is a fantastic way of accomplishing the goals we all share about preserving a wildlife corridor. And so I would encourage you to think about policy as opposed to moving the blocks. The third is, as this process has evolved, the light industrial that we thought would be adequate for North Coast Brewing Company, as well as our historical uses that we hope to have next to our existing engine house, that large pink blot there, becoming concerned that the uses may not overlap exactly, and we may look at visitor being a more appropriate zoning, and I would leave that to Marie to have that discussion. But we're worried that light industrial really doesn't encompass what's actually going to be happening there. As Chris mentioned briefly before, we were sad when our red wandered across the street. We would hope that it comes back north of Redwood. One of the reasons why is Mendocino is stunning. One of the reasons why is that 2,400 foot of Main Street that goes out along the bluffs looking out over the water. You have the same thing here. Redwood could become Fort Bragg's Main Street. It could go all the way out to the hotel, but if you have everything to the south of Redwood clear, open, you could have a commercial block running all the way along there, exactly like what you see in Mendocino, extending Fort Bragg all the way out to the coast. And our hope is the hotel design that we're going to show you in September could kind of become the living room for Fort Bragg, a place that people could come, see the ocean, have a great place to have dinner, tie the city together in a beautiful setting, tying it back to the ocean, which has been cut off from Fort Bragg for how many 100+ years? So it's an opportunity to use Redwood, and I'd really encourage you to allow, if you want to do promenade, trees, everything, I agree, just put it on the south side, not the north, so we can have those businesses that allow people to walk without large open gaps they're walking along. Finally, on the northwest corner of the property, I would encourage you to consider a block of visitor in the extreme northwest corner of the property there. We've had extensive discussions with Pomo Indian. The Indians about doing some sort of visitor center there and interpretive center for them on that property, as well as our Glass Beach station, which is our intention of having the trains come up at that point. So I'd like to at least consider the appropriate zoning for something like that, if visitors the right zoning or whatever you guys see is appropriate. So that's it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, Jennifer Bosma, Harvest Market. I'd like to talk about the open space on the acreage of land that we have purchased. A little more. Planning Commission. We've spoken with the Planning Commission, and we've asked our botanical study should be done by that September 21st meeting. We'll be bringing that, as well as some designs that we have planned out there. And we will also have an arborist to determine the health of the trees that we're talking about across from Starbucks. And we just would hope that you would keep an open mind on that piece of our property, not the whole thing, just that piece, until we have all that information to you and base those things on facts.
Thank you.
Amy Wynn, Coastal Planning and Biology. Regarding urban reserve, open space, and industrial, and, you know, this potential growth area of the former mill site that's now currently being zoned as about 70% not immediately developable and 22% developable. What I do all day long, all week long with my fellow planners and biologists is we spend all of our time focused on finding the least environmentally impacting location for development, mostly in the coastal zone up and down the coast from, you know, Westport down to Gualala. This coast is beautiful because it's protected for natural resources, views to and along the coast, access to and along the coast. We have access along the coast, along the edge of the western edge of this property. It's absolutely fantastic. Where we come into constraints with our work during the week is where can we make some of these things happen. We have had people ask for development that can't currently be accommodated in town because of limitations that Marie was talking about. Properties are too small, constrained by ESHA, available infrastructure. The place to, you know, right now there's a lot of this site that is asphalt. It is kind of an urban wasteland. We are, this property, this city is surrounded by state parks, surrounded by timberland and ag, as well as very low density residential. It's part of what makes our coast beautiful. I love our coast. This is where I feel at home, the first place I've ever felt at home, and that's part of why. The whole time I've been here, this property has been either a timber processing or it's been empty asphalt. So with this balance of development and open space and parks, I would just like us to keep in mind that this is our place where we have the ability to grow intelligently without impacting resources, and that if we were to close this off so that we can't utilize the development potential of that doesn't exist elsewhere in town, we would have, you know, the town would have to try to annex somewhere else, which we know how difficult that is to do. We don't have asphalt elsewhere surrounding the town where we can annex and easily convert, you know, upzone to, or downzone rather, to job creating opportunities. So I just want us all to keep that in mind as perspective. People are saying they, you know, and I agree, love this coast because of what we have surrounding it. I think we can maintain that while balancing development on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I do have a speaker card, Mr. Pinoli. Okay, thank you. Any other public comment on the industrial zone on the south side, open space, urban reserve? Okay, we're good to council for discussion, deliberation, and possible recommendation.
I think Amy pointed out something that is important to keep in mind, and that is because of council action that acquired through grant the Coastal Conservancy property from Georgia Pacific that provided us the coastal trail both north and south. The coastal access, public access to the coast has been provided up front, which is great. And that was the most important thing going in, the council felt at the time, was let's make sure the public finally has access to the coast, and we do. So we've got that. In terms of the open space versus public facilities, it sounds to me as though the public facilities would allow a lot of the things that the community has come forward with as suggestions in terms of what to possibly develop out there. So, and a lot of those were contained within the urban reserve in my mind. Again, the urban reserve is non-specific. However, I envisioned a hospital or a school, a university, or a research center, or something, or a desal plant, or a, like I said, a power plant powered by solar panels that are on a solar farm right adjacent, same piece of property, providing this town power in the future. So I personally think that I want to hear on September 21st what specific things people might have in mind, including on the south portion. Harvest Market
take a walk along the property lines yesterday. I think we all have done that. We should mention that. We didn't talk about ex parte before the meeting, but I know they have not a specific plan in mind just yet. They're, like she said, waiting for scientific evidence through an arborist review and other things to determine what they're going to do there. But the specifics of how to utilize that particular piece of property, I think, again, can wait until September 21st. Overall, what I'm saying is I'm comfortable with what we have on the south portion, with what we've done with the map, and it's the same one I'm looking at here, that we're looking at there, and that is moving some of that urban reserve to public facilities. The light industrial, I understand that one portion, the darker purple, that people have said sort of an island, and I'm interested to hear more before we get to a final decision there. Whether we could keep that, whether it's more realistic to keep that open space, because I think we've given some direction, although it's not specific, in terms of, at some point, daylighting both Alder Creek and Maple Creek, and maybe that does fall into where their natural path to the ocean might be, and I know I'm being kind of general here, but I'm trying to tell you, in my mind, as we've gone through a lot here in the last couple hours, so I'm happy with what we have here, understanding that we're going to actually get this a little more specific once we get more input from the property owners and from others in the community on September 21st. And I think that's important to keep in consideration. But for now, in terms of changing direction that we're going, I think we're going in the right direction. We've had input from the community. We do have property owners with some specific plans. And, if we can accommodate them and it makes sense, and also has a real vision for the future, so it's not a hodgepodge situation. I think there were some good points brought up about the safety in terms of cleaning up the property, but let's keep in mind that the hotspots that have been determined by both agencies, California Toxic Control, DTCS, whatever that acronym is, and also others, the hotspots aren't in the general areas we're talking about developing right now. And we're not talking about selling any property or developing any property where these hotspots are. And I think that people must understand that, and the people that signed the petition, I think would be happy to know that we know where the real hotspots are. And we're not putting any development there at this point, nor are we planning to. But the people that have purchased property so far, those have been determined to be clean by other, not just Georgia Pacific and their scientists. Other independent agencies have determined that so we're not developing anything or suggesting we zone for development any property that we know is going to be a problem. Now, Georgia Pacific at this point says, oh, it's not a problem, you can do some things there. We haven't chosen to do anything there, other than at this point heavy industrial or industrial, which would make the most sense. So just to answer those that are saying, you're ignoring 4,000 people, no, we're not. What those 4,000 people are worried about is how this property eventually looks. And we are trying our best and being as careful as we can without determining the future that it's going to blend into the environment, that it's going to be something, and we've got the Coastal Commission behind our back. Anything we do, anything any developer does, must understand that the Coastal Commission is the next layer, and even though we've got an LCP amendment that says you can do this, doesn't mean you can do exactly what you think you can. So we're going to make sure, we're not sitting here, developing, like I said, canneries and car manufacturers out there. We're keeping everything focused, I think, on a clean, and like I said, self-sustaining. Let's use this property to help us sustain ourselves. Deep cell, we'll have all the water we need. Maybe a little miniature mill to have building materials. You've got, the potential for a power plant. I just see us self-sustaining up there. Nothing we've done changes that vision for me. So I'm happy with it so far. Thank you.
We'll go down the line or go next. Councilmember Marcel Kay.
Well, I was excited to hear that the sorry, the facilities, oh, sorry, what's the facilities
Public
designation? Sorry, thank you. The public facilities designation enabled university and hospital and a bunch of these different things that we had been talking about and trying to understand what zoning would be necessary to enable them. So I do like that as a suggested alternative. I am, and I'm not particularly comfortable with the map on the, that's being projected at the moment. The housing that was added to the south end, the build out to me there just looks, it makes me really uncomfortable. And we need housing, but I'd rather see it incorporated, cleverly, being somehow incorporated in the zoning to enable dorms and workforce housing, that there's a way to do it without driving up the property prices to make it, to price them out of actually being industrial. If we can be careful about it, I think that would be highly preferred. I appreciated Ms. Wynn's comment about that one. I would be inclined to increase the coastal dependent zone so that if the Noyo Center did end up wanting to expand their operations, that was an option. I would, the light industrial out there, I would suggest that we combine our different industrial zoning along with the mill site employment to create one mill site industrial zone about which we are really mindful in terms of what we want to permit out there and what we want to enable, to the point of good jobs. The more we can focus on restorative industries and economic multipliers, things that are really going to reverberate through our community and help create not only good jobs, but a ripple effect of additional jobs in our community. I think that's really key. So yeah, I feel like we have a better shot at doing that if we're really just consolidating down to a mill site industrial classification. And as far as its placement goes, I think there was a misperception that I was arguing against any industrial on the site in our last meeting. I think it's really critical that we find a way to incorporate it. And that's kind of, we have a really serious challenge here trying to balance the need for a healthy ecosystem and the need for industrial zoning so we can enable these industries to be here and stimulate our economy. So I would like to see as much as we can add without compromising the integrity of the landscape, and I'd like to see it tucked as far east as we possibly can in that southern region. So I do keep going back and forth, admittedly. The section in the donut hole, as it's often referenced, what I do like about that placement right now is it's on the part of it that has the higher elevation. I'm concerned that it does extend pretty far west. As we talk about climate change and the dangers associated, I think if we had a big event and our industrial was in the first line of fire there, the economic hit to our town would be crippling. So the more we can protect our industrial and keep it back from the cliff's edge as well as the lower lying zone, I think the better position will be as climate continues to shift. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if anything, I would maybe cut off the western section of that industrial in the donut hole and add some down where the housing is to the east next to the highway commercial. And then instead of the light industrial there, I would be inclined to do part of that light industrial to the ocean serving, and then part of that as the public facilities, remove the western housing, and reduce the overall public facilities to have some open space on the southern end of that. So, sorry, that's a lot, but I'm saying I'll stop and let somebody else get out. Yeah. So I cut that off. be there, it's a better
My turn. I didn't have any questions earlier because I really am trying to stay open-minded and listen to what you have to say. And these are the ideas I wrote down, which jive with what I've been thinking. First of all, my mantra is that if you want to control what this area is going to look like, you need to own it and sell it to the people that you feel that are compatible with what we're thinking, what our vision is. So the Koch brothers still own it. And so we may want a 300 capacity theater and a conference center and that sort of thing, but they could sell it to the Hyatt or the Motel 6 or something like that. So it isn't quite what we had in mind, but we zoned it for hotel, that sort of thing. So my mantra is that you need to own it. But moving along, I am totally in favor of keeping the mill site industrial zoning that we already have. I think that's what it's called, this timber, basically, mill site industrial, okay, because it gives us the most flexibility. Here are my thoughts. I'd like to keep that where the treatment plant is. I'd like to preserve that for expansion. I believe that at some point we're going to have to go to tertiary to increase our ability to recycle water and provide irrigation, at least to whatever we're thinking about on the mill site and other places. I believe that I love the idea of the Redwood extension all the way down to the end with businesses on either side, or at least one side. I love the idea of a visitor center, or at least our Chamber of Commerce moving north by Glass Beach, something like that. And definitely a Pomo or Native American museum of some sort on that end. I don't want any fencing. The workforce housing is really important, really, really important. And so I think, despite what was said by Marie, I believe that, you know, these group home kind of things where you have several bedrooms and people can just check in. Someone owns it, I don't know, we own it, someone owns it. They check in, they're able to live there, work there temporarily. It's not meant to be a family home. And it is, you know, they have a kitchen and a shared kitchen, parking, whatever. And this becomes available to the hospital, it becomes available to Harvest Market or whoever has temporary housing, but also it could be also part of it could belong to the Mendocino College, and I think we need to open that dialogue again with those people because they're the new owners of that college. College of Redwoods lost interest ages ago, but Mendocino College is looking for students. They want students, they're going to have dorms. In terms of daylighting, that's a really exciting plan. I've been out there twice with Tom Hunter, and we've looked at the trees more intensively, and I recommended to him he get a vegetation management plan through a landscape architect. But it's a really exciting opportunity for hikes and bikes along there, along the highway starting, and then just kind of meander around the property. That would incorporate the ponds and all these other things. So it's already there. And then that opens up a conversation to daylighting creeks. I totally agree with preserving the aesthetics of this town. I mean, I think that's why we're all here. We want to keep what we have. Can we do jobs and that? We have to think about global warming and sea rise. I have a little tiny story about Mono Lake. When I was a college student, I went to Mono Lake and I was able to walk out miles up to my ankles in water because they were taking all the water away. You all know the story. And then all the seagulls that nested there were being predated and diminished quite a bit because they didn't have islands to put their eggs on, and so the critters could just walk out there and take them. And then I came back as a tour guide, and I didn't know that it had been fixed, and water sea levels is rising. And there's a huge museum out there owned by the Park Service, and it's a wonderful place to visit, and you can see they have signs out there saying this is the level at this year, and this is the level at this year, and this is the level at peak. And so you can see, you can just walk out and see how the lake has risen since the water rates were changed. I would love to see that sort of thing here on our mill site. I would love to see us get involved with this college on studying the sea rise efforts. I think everyone in the world would love to come and see what's going on in, for example, California. They're going to be here anyway. Let's go see that sea level rise study that's happening, that's affecting all of us in the world. And there's a lot of opportunity for education. I think the skunk train is going to provide a lot of jobs with what they have said they're planning over at the sheds. They're talking about a little mini theater. They're talking about open space and museums and that sort of thing. I think a lot of the industrial could be over there, and we just hopefully leave the zoning available to them to do that. And let's see, anything else? Regarding parking, it's very important to have parking. We're lucky that Skunk Tree lets us park here and we don't have a 2-hour limit. We need parking, but we need to encourage, as was said earlier, we need to encourage not driving around this town. So we either need to have an electric shuttle going around so people can just get on, get off, get on, get off. Or some way for them to see the town without getting in their cars and going to park somewhere. And make it easy and all hours until some point. And I'd like to encourage, plug-in kind of cars get some benefit. So we need to provide more charging stations and that sort of thing out there, but that's not a zoning issue. So to finish up, summary is big emphasis on working with the Mendocino College on what we can do about education, looking at potentially purchasing the mill site, the whole mill site, and allowing someone else to clean up the ponds with grants that we can't get, and then most of the industrial going on the north end.
Just a few things for me. I'd like to have an idea of where Maple Creek will come across the mill site industrial before I decided too much on what I wanted to do there. It would be nice to know if we need to decrease the size of that. The public facilities, I think, allows for a lot of what the public and the council are asking for. So I'm a fan of that. The housing on the south end, I agree with Marcel Hay. I agree we need more housing. I'm just not sure. I'm almost convinced that that's not the spot. What the scope train Mr. Hart mentioned about the promenade, I understand what he's talking about. I think we'll gain a lot more information. Once we hear from the property owners, we get a little bit better idea of what you're after. Because it is, I don't want to say frustrating, but it's difficult to go back and forth on these things and then have to wait for somebody to come in and give us an idea of what they want afterwards. I don't put the blame for any of that on anybody other than just process here. So I look forward to the September meeting. As far as the Planning Commission map versus the City Council map on the highway commercial, Ms. Bosma spoke about keeping an open mind. I think that's a really good idea. They're putting the time in right now to have the experts come in and look to see what's there. I think it would be irresponsible of us to close the door on that today before we hear what it is that they're actually trying to get rid of. We could end up saving dead and dying trees. So before we make a decision there, I think we need to let the experts, if they're paying for, come in and weigh in, and then also get a little bit better idea of what their plan is.
Okay, appreciate all the comments, and I will also say that I toured the property that is we have on this map as highway commercial. It was very helpful to see that piece of property. It's beautiful. It triggered an amazing allergic reaction to me of the grass that's there, but that's okay.
Me too.
I saw it flying by my eyes. I mean, we were trampling on the grass, that's why. But anyway, I support giving flexibility in that section so that when the environmental studies come back, we would have more information. But I think the Planning Commission's attempt to extend that as far as possible as highway commercial, I think, is helpful for the property owner. I support extending the coastal development so that the Noyo Center, if they need to expand, that gives them the future ability to do that. I also support the Planning Commission's little tiny triangle of highway commercial down on the south part of the map there. I think that that's a good idea. I just want to make sure that the council's direction on the wildlife corridor is preserved as far as the amount of space that we asked for, and if that works for the northern property owner, to keep that as much as within 150 feet as we asked for, if we can. That's important to a lot of people that I've heard from. I completely support the public facilities on the southern portion as far as what we had as urban reserve. I don't support the medium density housing section there. On the eastern part of that public facilities, I would rather see industrial there because we need more industrial, and I don't want to keep reducing industrial in that southern portion. These vacant and underutilized properties that you gave to us, Marie, is very helpful. There's a total of 22 acres that's not being used in the industrial zone because there's no water or sewer. And so eventually we hope to get that up there, but I think we have to add as much as light industrial and mill site industrial as possible, or to keep that entire section of where medium density housing is for public facilities, because again, that has many uses for the city and a lot of flexibility. But my understanding is that commercial, we also have flexibility to upzone, is that the correct term? Easier. It's also easier to upzone for public facility zoning. So I think that gives us some, for the future, a lot of leeway. I believe that's it for me. So now,
after sort of reviewing, listening to Jessica and Bernie too, especially the western portion of that on the Planning Commission map. Yes, up there, the western portion of the residential. Keeping in mind we need more residential, but I'm not sure that's the place for it, given what else I envision being there. So I'm comfortable with removing that, and, at this point, giving direction to removing that, or
yes,
our vision more so than the Planning Commission's vision there. That would make three of us. And I think I heard you say that too, and I'm not sure if Jessica.
It could be, in my opinion, it could either be all public facilities, because again, for dorm housing with the University College, it gives the ability to be there, so there could be some housing out there. I just want to, so I would either go with those strips being industrial or just all public facility.
Yeah, it could be all public facility. I haven't, I'm not so strong-minded on the eastern side, residential perhaps there. Like you're talking about maybe a grocery store with some other ancillary businesses there that could fit in better, I think, with residential than out where it's proposed on this particular map. Also, I think that would cause a problem, again, keep in mind, I think that the environmental justice policy of the Coastal Commission could require any residential development to be 20% low income, and that hasn't been defined, but it could be really low. And again, is that the spot where you want it? I don't know. not what I envisioned there. So anyway, those are my thoughts on after hearing what others said, to give more clear direction for that particular spot there.
And on housing, keep in mind, on the northern portion, there's quite a bit dedicated for medium and high density. But I also like to say, we don't want to forget the rest of the city. There's so many areas in city limits for housing. And I think that that's where we need to focus more housing. There are many empty lots in town. Where, you know, the Denko project is one of them that's starting. I think that's a good model to try where the infrastructure is already there. And we want to help developers to develop housing in town. So that's just my thought.
For the public facility zoning, as we talk about up zoning and down zoning, hierarchy of zoning, what would be considered down zoning from public facilities other than open space?
Probably light industrial or industrial would be considered down zoning. Because that will have less of a value as land than public facilities will. I'm a little nervous to say because, like I know generally what industrial property goes for on a per acre basis in Fort Bragg. Public facilities property doesn't really change hands very often in Fort Bragg. It's pretty much all owned by the city, the school district, and the college. So I'm not really sure how it would value market-wise, but when I look at just the uses that are allowed, it has some uses in it that I would consider have a higher value than you would in industrial. So for example, like hospital, like the medical types of uses, and also the university types of uses would have a higher value for property than industrial would. So that's my general sense.
Okay, anything else?
I wanted to weigh in on the trees. I like Vice Mayor Norvell's idea of waiting till we have more information. I think that's important. I'd also like to throw out there for future conversations, I feel like we keep going pretty black and white with it, where we're either going to go highway commercial or we're going to go open space. And another option we could consider would be an overlay zone with special conditions the city sets. So I think we'll have some opportunity to be a little bit more creative about it if that's the road we feel like we need to go down.
Marie, do you know, I know the Urban District had a little bit of trouble for cutting trees down. Have they mitigated that yet, or are they still looking for a place to plant trees?
They have not mitigated that. They are still looking for a place to plant trees.
So it's like a 5-to-1 or 4-to-1?
It's a 4-to-1 tree issue. That they cut down the Minnesota cypress. I do not believe there's any Minnesota cypress in this area. So from what I've heard from the property owners, botanists, that there are no rare trees in this area at all. So what you have out there is some invasive trees, Monterey cypress, which is an invasive tree, and then you also have eucalyptus, which is an invasive tree, and then some more generally everywhere around kind of trees like coastal shore pine and the redwood trees. And I don't think there's actually any bishop pine out there. But I'm not sure.
There is.
Oh, there's bishop.
Yeah.
Okay.
We just did a tree survey, my friend and I, and there's a lot of Monterey pine. Monterey pine is not the favorite pine, but one thing about it is that it protects the other trees when you're trying to create a nurse tree for what you want. And so it grows fast, and you're supposed to take it down, but then they never do.
Yeah, it's kind of grown out there in a big solid line. It was clear they were all planted.
I know this is a little off topic, and I apologize, but has the district reached out to the city to try and find a place to plant the trees? Have we considered anywhere out there?
Yeah, so they did reach out to us. We met with them and Fish and Wildlife, and I showed them a few possible locations. One would be where all the eucalyptus are on the north side of the Mayo Harbor Bridge area. The other one would be, so actually, you want I can show you on the map, it's a lot easier, right?
So there's this kind of gully down by the south parking area. So that would actually be pretty good habitat for bishop pine. And the other idea was there's some eucalyptus here that's actually on city property because it's part of our Noyo Park, Noyo Beach Park, where you could plant some of those trees. So we did an initial just site visit, and it hasn't moved any further from them in terms of a proposal, which is why I haven't brought it forward to you, because until they write a proposal, it just seems premature.
Do you have an idea of how many trees we're going to be allowed or room for on the space you showed?
The conversation didn't even get that far. It was more just looking at the habitat to see if it would be an appropriate habitat. I also let them know about private property owners, such as the Hans, who have a small bishop pine forest on the south side of the Noyo River, kind of across from Silvers, kind of that hill you're looking at. And there's some opportunities there to improve that habitat and add more bishop pine. I never actually talked with the Hans. I just said, here's some other property owners you might work with. And it really hasn't gone anywhere since that meeting. I haven't been contacted by them.
Thank you.
In terms of a vegetation management plan, I really think we need to get professional assistance on that. I mean, my recommendation would not be to just plant trees there. I would have maybe wax myrtle or something that a little more salt protection before get those established before you start putting in the plugs. And definitely not 2-year-old or even 1-year-old trees, but the little guys, so they have a chance to adjust, and they have to come from this zone, you know all that. But I just think you need to put something else there as a buffer at the beginning, and at first you have to water, and then then it takes over.
As far as walking that property and seeing some of those trees, I have to tell you, I'd be interested to see the professional study that comes back, the arborist study, because I did not feel comfortable standing under some of those trees. And I could see where several very large trees there that could crash right into Highway 1. I mean, moving car, they were huge and swaying in the wind that was there. So I have to say that it'd be interesting to see, which ones are salvageable, which ones can be saved and that'll be there for 30 years, or what's going to be there in 10 years. So that's going to help us a lot, because we've had a lot of public comment about that forest. And so there's some spindly ones, and they've been there a long time, but we did see some that have come down there, and I just worry about crashing onto Highway 1 and who's responsible for that. So then we're just going to get a summary of this. Jacob, did you want to speak to this, or I'm going to move on to the other sections.
Is there a separate tree section? I just have one comment I didn't talk about.
Yeah, we will have that in just a sec. We're going to, actually the council kind of hit on all of the points that I mentioned, but we will ask for public comment on the next section of items. So we'd like to get a summary and a consensus from our city manager.
So please let me know if I have this wrong, but the general consensus I got from the council was sort of a wait and see what the specific property owners bring back on September 21st, particularly in light of the trees on the Harvest Market property, and considering what the skunk train would do, be open-minded to sort of the zoning of those areas until we have more specifics. I got general agreement with the idea of a public facilities zoning in the south end. We also got the residential, at least specifically on the west side. I got the consensus that the council is not in favor of the housing there, although you support housing potentially elsewhere in the city. I'm not sure I got consensus on the east side housing. That was kind of one of the questions there. We've had consensus in the past, and I had some talk, and this is on the north side, which is the wildlife border. But it sounds like maybe that's still sort of what exactly that involves, whether it's the 150 or something that moves that's expandable depending on how it goes. I don't know that I had a consensus on that. The question about, everybody seemed to support industrial, but there was talk about changing it to mill site industrial, sort of the standard out there. And I'm not sure I got a consensus on that, but there was at least a couple council members who supported that idea. daylighting the creeks, this again came up, and making sure that we sort of accommodate, our zoning accommodates that going forward seemed to be a consensus, and let me know if I've gotten that wrong. Let me check here. Facilities. I think that is kind of generally what I had out of it. Please let me know if I missed anything or if you want to add.
I have one question for Larry. With the wildlife corridor, are there any ground rules that we haven't discussed that go with it as far as setbacks from the wildlife corridor? I mean, if we set up 150 feet, is it just 150 feet? Or are there rules that come with the wildlife corridor that say a property owner could do anything within so many feet of the wildlife corridor?
That is entirely up to you, so that you would set those criteria yourself. The way that the conversation has gone so far is it's kind of been an either-or approach. The Planning Commission has taken the approach that you zone it visitor or zone it urban reserve or whatever, but then require the 150 feet, 100 feet back from the coastal trail and 200 feet back from the bluff edge, there would be no development. So essentially, just for reference, if you look up here on the map where my little eyedropper is, this is 100 feet. So when the city acquired this property, by and large, the coastal trail corridor is 100 feet wide. So if you add 100 feet to that, but then you also are going to add back from the edge of the trail itself, because oftentimes the trail obviously is not right on the bluff edge. You're really talking about a corridor that looks like this. It's a pretty big corridor. And the Planning Commission's idea was that if that property was owned by a property owner who had like visitor serving activities, they might be able to do, you know, the gardening or the landscaping in there so that it's more attractive to visitors and could also be, wildlife could also get through it.
And I guess we had, okay. I was just going to say, I think we had that discussion with the Hearts here one time, last time, a similar discussion about, you know, every hotel, major hotel would have some sort of landscaping buffer to go up to wherever this line might be, so that, remember that, you know, they take that into account. In other words, they wouldn't build the edge of the hotel right up to that 100 foot. So, but anyway, how much I heard from them, I think, and they can correct me if I'm wrong.
Mr. Hart, you would on the September 21 meeting address this publicly for us?
Yeah, we would actually have, with permission, we'd have our architects make a presentation showing you what we think would look, based on what we've heard so far about what the council has in mind for both the residential and the hotel, as well as the commercial block. Just sort of show what we think it could look like, and give you some feedback about early numbers as far as how many people, how many jobs, things like that. And so that's
to address that.
Oh, absolutely. Our intent here is that's what I was mentioning. If you do it by policy, and then you say, look, from the bluffs, we want to make sure there's a nice wide corridor to protect wildlife. We can do that because the bluffs vary, you know. But if you do that straight chop off on the thing, it's going to really limit the architect's ability to design something.
I think that's a good recommendation. Put it into policy, perhaps.
And just one comment about landscaping, and let's say there was a hotel there and they have a huge lawn and that sort of thing, and there's no restriction to what they can put on that lawn, and unless we establish a resolution or something saying they can't. So we're talking about wildlife corridor, and it might be like anti-wildlife.
No, well, I didn't. All I said was they actually specifically stated under the conditions that we were talking about, specific to them, that they envisioned, you know, having, if we put a wildlife corridor, that they, you know, respect that, and not only that, we'll probably have a little buffer zone to add on to that, that's all. That's specific. I'm just saying, if it's policy, it's going to be a policy. Right? They've already told us what they envision. So I agree that, yes, I mean, some other person could come along and do something else, sure. That's why it has to be a policy.
I think that's a good consideration as we go forward.
And I think we should keep in mind the comment about the ocean erosion and sea level rise and the fact that as permanent as it may seem today, that bluff is going to change. You just need to walk anywhere along the bluffs here recently and see storm damage. Where the bluff once was is no longer there. And there's a pile of rocks down on the beach now. And so that's going to change. So if they have a policy so many feet from the bluff, you know, how do we do that? So
Plan retreat.
it's going to be probably a difficult one to really be specific on. I don't know, Marie, you've done more planning than most of us in this room, so. I don't know, have you ever done anything on it? I mean, have there been adjustments due to erosion in boundary determinations, whether it's easement, whatever it might be?
So if you have a policy that says that development is not permitted within 200 feet of the bluff edge, that's pretty easy to measure whenever that proposal comes in. If the bluff edge retreats, then the development that has already been built would be considered grandfathered in, so it would be considered a legal non-conforming use. When we acquired this property, the amount of property we acquired was considered adequate for 100 years plus of erosion. So we have had a geotechnical done out there, and this bluff edge is, notwithstanding the little bit of erosion we had around the Bass Beach Stairs, is pretty, it's stronger than you might think, and so I think, that's just what I know.
So, in the considerable process that the city's gone through around this for the last decade plus, has there been a study of the ecosystems out there and how the different wetlands interrelate?
Yes.
Because that seems like important information as we talk about the donut hole and stuff. It keeps being brought up that industrial in the middle there would be disruptive. Is there already information that has been gathered on this?
Yeah, so there are a number of reports that have been done. There's probably been 7 or 8 different botanical studies done at different times. We have a burrowing owl study. There was a study done on basically all special status animals on the site. There was a wetland, there's been a couple of different wetland studies. So one was an Army Corps wetland delineation. There's also been a Coastal Commission wetland delineation study done. And then there was a study done in 2009, I think, specifically about creek daylighting. Actually, there's been 3 or 4 studies that have been done about creek daylighting at different times. Would you like me to show you where Maple Creek actually comes in and what those studies recommend visually on the screen?
Sure.
So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. So this is Maple Street right here, and there's a basin right here.
Marie, could you use the laser pointer?
Sure, I can.
See your.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The people at home can't see the laser pointer, that's the challenge.
They
But
can't see your cursor either.
Oh, well, I actually looked at it and I could see yours. But at any rate, this is about where the stormwater comes in right here. There's 2 48-inch culverts that dump into about maybe a 1 acre kind of depression. From that, there are 2 culverts that go right to here. Those 2 48-inch culverts again. So a reasonable creek daylighting process would probably take advantage of that. One of the challenges for creek daylighting is that Pond 8 offers a lot of stormwater cleaning, basically settling activities for all the city stormwater that goes through this site. So 70% of city stormwater actually goes through these 2 culverts that come through here. So this is the Alder Street culvert layout, comes right about like this. Pond 5 is an isolated pond, so it's not connected water-wise, sorry, just have to make that one up. It's not connected water-wise to these 2 systems. So these systems come into Pond 8, this culvert ends here and comes in here, and then they both go over the spillway right here. So that's how the water gets to the ocean. The creek daylighting options in the past have consisted of either expanding this area so that there's a larger wetland here so that you can continue to have the stormwater settlement properties that Pond 5 has, if Pond 5 is removed, or doing a combination of that and connecting it to Pond 8, Pond 5, and then coming down and winding its way through to the ocean. Another creek daylighting option was to just daylight this creek straight into Pond 8 and retain Pond 8 as a wetland. There were two ideas there, either retain the entirety of Pond 8 or fill in this part of the pond and have a spillway down in here that then winds through the property. There are many, many coastal act issues with any project such as this, because eliminating wetlands, even if they're artificially created, is very frowned upon by the Coastal Act, and this is an 8-acre pond. So restoration can be considered an alternative to that. So I don't know if you have any questions of that, or any questions for you. I can tell you that this, there's some talk about some water here coming up from the Alder Street culvert. That water is actually coming from a pump within this building, so this building has a sump pump that is pumping out onto the mill site. It's not actually connected to the culvert, because the culvert has so much force in it. If it was, we would have a geyser there instead of a bubbling creek. And I actually was concerned about that, and I talked with Public Works, so just to make sure.
Okay, we'll get back to clarifying the consensus of the council. You want to start? Which one?
So I feel like what I said was pretty good. Public facilities, there's not real support for the southern residential. It looks like currently we've kind of got the daylight, at least the open space that potentially accommodates that. The wait and see on the trees and sort of some of the zoning that impacts the skunk tank. And it sounds like, as far as the wildlife corridor, that we may want to explore what that exactly means and what the best way to preserve that is, whether it's a set amount or it's something that changes, or if it involves landscaping and kind of accommodating the potential growth up there. And then the only other kind of question that is still sort of out there is the industrial. There's a general support for industrial, making sure it's appropriate, it's in the right place, and whether or not we want to sort of make it all mill site industrial. Sort of, I didn't get a consensus, but that's something we can continue to explore.
If it's all mill site industrial, would that include other industrial uses? In other words, is that sort of the base of industrial uses, and then it'd be easier to, in other words, we keep hearing about upzoning. My concern is that going down far enough so we can upzone to something better?
I think some of that.
Keeping it, is there an advantage to doing it in that respect?
So, and I'll probably defer to Marie, but I think a lot of it has to do with your use tables and how you define it there.
Okay.
And then, but Marie, you
That would
can
make
expand
sense.
on that.
Yeah.
Sure, I'd be happy to expand on that. The way I would describe it very simply is the light industrial tends to be industrial uses that are not noisy, not disruptive, like smell-wise. So what could be possible in the mill site industrial that you wouldn't allow in the light industrial, for example, would be like a new timber mill, which has been something that has been talked about here quite a lot in the past. So if you change it all to mill site industrial, the way the use tables are written now, that would be allowing a lumber mill in more locations and more sort of the heavier type of industrial, or what I would call medium intensity industrial in other locations. That said, I have to say that I'm not super confident that a lot of those industries are ever going to come to Fort Bragg. So I think the realistic one is a timber mill. And so that's really the one that you want to think about where you're going to allow.
Right. My thought about that is keep it simple. And I never thought I'd agree with Rex. But we're dividing this up into little tiny pieces, and we have a vision. We know what we want, but we might be cutting off our nose to spite our face by subdividing it into little tiny sections. So mill site industrial allows us the most possible uses. In terms of a timber mill, well, first, let's just say the only timber company left in the area is Jackson State Forest. And, yeah, that'd be nice if there was a timber mill here, but there isn't. But my conversations with the skunk train is that, you know, I would love to see a portable sawmill. Maybe it would be in the sheds, I don't know, but something for tourists to see what it's like, you know, to mill lumber. And the logs could come from Jackson State Forest, for example. So that allows more, you know, it just allows more flexibility. That's my point.
I'm willing to defer to others. I didn't seem like a big deal from what I understand anyway, from what I just heard. So how's everybody else feels?
Well, I'm comfortable with the way it's looked right here, like industrial on that side, and mill site. That's okay with me.
Because I'm comfortable with the way it's presented, but if I can be swayed into changing, and I'm not so far.
When you say presented, which map are you talking about? Because we're working off the field.
I'm talking about our map.
Hours of the commission.
Our map, the one that's
The newest one.
And then we made some changes to it.
We've already. Anyway. So we, you know, either way, I haven't been swayed, but I mean, if a third person goes for keeping it all mill use industrial, that's fine.
I mean, I have to say, I do feel pretty strongly about this one, just because, you know, if we're doing some heavy industrial, some light industrial, there are already existing use tables there, and I feel like we can be more mindful about what we're actually allowing here, because we don't necessarily want to extend the same parameters to north of town and in town as we do to the mill site. I think as far as keeping it simple, it would be simpler to have one set of industrial uses.
How's the rest of the council feel about that comment?
You're talking, I'm sorry, you're talking just here, right?
I'm talking anywhere we end up deciding to put industrial zoning, that it be one type of specific mill site industrial that has a use table we've crafted around the mill site specifically, as opposed to, say, like adopting heavy industrial, which allows uses like storage or, you know, like hashing through all the details of what's there and trying to apply it to the whole city. This we could just craft around the mill site specifically. Because I do think it has a different set of considerations.
You want to call it purple?
But I guess where I'm stuck a little bit on that is the difference between light industrial, which the way Marie described it is a little less obtrusive. And I think carving out a piece of that is going to be important. So I don't know if I'm ready to give up light industrial.
Well, I was going to say, especially Bernie, your point, I was thinking that too, where it is, yeah, back above, where it abuts the downtown central business district, yeah, that whole part up there, if that was left, and, you know, we want something a little more what she said was light industrial, something that's not noisy, that's not smelly. I agree. So let me refine what I said and say if you're willing to keep that light industrial, if the majority of the council at this point wants to turn the southern part, most of that anyway, is on the southern part. No use industrial, I don't see a particular problem, because we could upzone it to light industrial at that point, if someone wants to come in, so I'm okay with that.
And to
There's
that
a compromise.
To that point, we could combine mill site employment, heavy industrial. Well, shoot, that's kind of contradictory. But I was going to say we could at least narrow it down to just mill site industrial and light industrial.
Yeah. I agree with the vice there, thinking that light industrial, I just think that that's a good carve out for it. But I'm not wedded to it, so it's up to Councilmember Robinson, how do you feel about the split out of light?
I'm sorry, I'm still,
You think leaving it all?
I'm not worried about. I'm not in favor of splitting. I like flexibility. And I'm not worried about whatever heavy industrial is going to involve versus light industrial. Into mill site industrial. I want mill site industrial.
That's what I thought. So Mayor, I feel like I've got a 2-2 split here.
Well, I don't know, there's a compromise vote over there.
No, I actually would, I want to see light industrial remain near the central business district, and I'm okay with the southern portion turning all into mill-use industrial, which sort of is a compromise. But, okay. And I think Bernie sort of felt that way too, although maybe I didn't hear him.
Marie, how does the mill site industrial versus the light industrial work with the Noyo Center if they wanted to expand to the east?
So I do want to just recommend that mill site industrial is a new zoning category, so you can put whatever use you want in it and keep out whatever use you don't want in it. And to that degree, I think Jessica's comment is very intelligent. Like, it does make you be very focused just on this location. My only concern was really about if you want a timber mill, just being conscious of where you wouldn't want that. Because if you're going to have that as a use in that zoning category, there's probably a place on this site that you wouldn't want it, and I think Lindy certainly picked one of them. There might be others, I don't know.
So we could incorporate what the Noyo Science Center is doing into the mill site industrial.
I wouldn't recommend that. So are you asking that if you could change the Noyo Center zoning to mill site industrial?
No, I think what we're talking about here, I'm going to confuse everybody a little bit more. The mill site industrial, I think what Jessica's talking about is taking the light industrial and converting that to mill site. Is that correct? What is that going to do to the Noyo Science Center if they want to expand to the east?
So if they want to expand to the east and you didn't give them that zoning now, they could buy the property if someone wanted to sell it to them, and then they could apply for an LCP amendment to change the zoning the way it is right now in this map. If you wanted to give them more space, you could go ahead and zone for more ocean-dependent uses now, which to the abalone farmer in the room is allowed in that zoning district.
We could also write into the mill site industrial the use for the Noyo Center. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Right.
Ocean-dependent.
You could, the challenge there again is you're combining uses that could be problematic from a coastal act perspective, because that ocean-dependent uses also includes museums and theater and retail use and research and development. And if you put all of those different types of uses into industrial, then you're getting into an issue where you have a zoning category that has too many allowable uses in it, very similar to what we had with the urban reserve.
The upside to expanding the ocean dependent section there, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, would also be that it's one of the preferred uses for the coastal commission. So it might help us build a better case to them if we do extend that instead of protecting the light industrial and the merchant table there. Division. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think the thing about coastal act priority uses is the coastal commission's always going to love them, and they're always going to resist you ever changing them to anything else.
I was just going to make a comment about the potential fear of having a timber mill. And it's just that there aren't any, the reason GP left was that there aren't any logs to feed the mill. And it's not true that we don't have trees around here. We have a lot of trees, but they're not all owned by the same company. And for a long time, Georgia Pacific was buying all Jackson State Forest logs. And then Jackson State Forest stopped logging for about 5 or 6 years, and that was the end. So they left. I don't see that happening here. I don't see any one owner having enough logs to keep a mill running and buying it and doing that. So I don't see any potential, if that's a fear.
No, I don't think the fears of, I don't find the mill objectionable at all. It's where, just as she had pointed out. That's all I was trying to say.
Good.
And if I can suggest, Mayor, we can maybe take a break, come back, have public comment on those last 3 issues, and then we can just do a final summary. It sounds like we're still sort of flexible anyways in what we've come to today, so.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Stretch our legs, get a bite to eat. So we'll take a 30-minute recess.